Okay. Hello. Hello. Cool. Hello. 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 We're all good, right? Yeah, it's good. Cool. Well, happy Friday, everybody. I'm going to practice my sermon today. Hopefully, before the worship team gets here and we get rolling on future Sundays. But anyway, without further ado, let's go. So, before we step into John chapter 9, I want to ask a few questions. Not the kind we say out loud, but the kind we carry deep inside of us. The kind most people never ask in church, but almost everyone feels questions like, why did this happen to me? Why didn't God stop it? Why does my story look so different from everyone else's? Why does God feel silent when I need him the most? And why don't some people get miracles while others do? Most of us, we don't say those things publicly, do we? We bury them, we push them down. We tell ourselves, good Christians shouldn't think like that. But you know what? Those questions, they are real. They are raw. They come from the deepest parts of our pain. And whether you're here in this room or watching online, you probably asked at least one of them in a quiet moment when nobody else was around. John 9 begins right there. The disciples see a man born blind, and everyone else was thinking, who sinned, this man or his parents? In other words, whose fault is it? Why did this happen? But Jesus does something beautiful. He doesn't shame the question. He doesn't dodge it. He doesn't scold them asking. He reframes it. You're looking for someone to blame, Jesus says, but this is not about blame. This is about God's work. And that's where our story starts today, with the questions we're afraid to ask, and a Savior who isn't afraid to answer them in a way that brings healing, purpose, and hope. Let's read John 9, 1-5, shall we? As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, It was not this man sinned, or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming, when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When early Christians heard the story, they recognized the disciples' questions very well. You see, in ancient times, disabilities were usually explained through blame. If someone was born blind, someone must have sinned, the child, the parents, or a previous generation. Suffering was treated like a moral scoreboard. So when the disciples asked, who sinned? They aren't trying to be cruel. They're repeating the assumptions that they carried. But Jesus overturns that entire framework. He refuses to tie the man's blindness to a specific sin. He won't reduce him to a theological case study, and he won't allow suffering to be explained with simple terms. Instead, Jesus reframes the situation. This condition isn't about blame. It's about God's work breaking into a broken world. To the people who heard this first, this was shocking. Jesus was totally deconstructing a rooted belief and replacing it with a vision of God who meets people in suffering, not one who causes suffering or punishment. We may not say it out loud, but we often think like the disciples, don't we? Hardship hits, we just ask without thinking, what did I do wrong? Is God punishing me? Why is this happening? We look for someone to blame, ourselves, others, even God. But Jesus redirects our gaze. Not all suffering is tied to personal failure. Not every hardship is a consequence of sin. And God is not waiting to strike you down every time you step outside the lines. Instead, Jesus invites us to see pain and suffering through a different lens. God is present in suffering, working in ways we can't see. He is not the author of our brokenness, but he's the Redeemer who steps into it. This means your struggle is not evidence of God's absence. Your hardship is not proof of his anger. Your pain is not pointless. Jesus sees you, not as a problem to solve, but as a person to love. And in the places you feel most helpless, he is already at work. So when Jesus refuses to play the blame game, he doesn't just correct their theology, he changes their vision. Instead of fixating on the past, he points them to what God is doing right now. And that leads to the second subpoint of our main point. Suffering isn't a dead end, but a doorway for God's work to be displayed. To the first century audience, Jesus' words would have landed like a shockwave. They lived in a world where suffering was usually read as divine punishment. But Jesus reframes this man's blindness. He doesn't say God caused it. He doesn't say the man deserved it. He doesn't blame the parents. Instead, he says this is the very place where the works of God will be displayed. Where others label the curse, Jesus treated it as a stage for God's power to break through. Number two, Jesus' mission carries urgency. His language of day and night signals that his public ministry is limited. While he is in the world, the light is shining bright. But when night comes, when he gets arrested and his death, those public works will cease. So they would have heard a warning and an invitation. God is working right now through Jesus. Don't miss the moment. We often assume God works through our strengths, our wins, our competence, our control. But Jesus teaches the opposite. God's glory often shines brightest in places where we feel most broken. Your weakness isn't wasted. Your struggle isn't sidelined. Your pain isn't pointless. God doesn't require God does not require perfect conditions to show his power. He often uses the very things that we wish he would remove. And we need to hear the urgency in the words of Jesus. We must do the works of him who sent him while it is day. In other words, don't wait to obey Jesus. Don't delay compassion. Don't postpone faithfulness. Don't assume you'll have more time. God is working right now, and he invites us to join him right now. So Jesus has corrected the assumptions and reframed this man's suffering, but he isn't finished. Next, he makes a bold declaration about himself, one that explains why he can bring meaning to suffering and turn darkness into sight. That takes us to the final movement of the first point. When Jesus says, "While I am in the world, I am the light of the world," the first audience would have heard more than a poetic metaphor. They would have remembered the Feast of Tabernacles, where giant lamps blazed in the temple courts to picture God's guiding presence. They would have heard echoes of Isaiah's promise that the Messiah would be a light to the nations. In other words, Jesus was claiming to be God's presence shining in human darkness. But in this moment, the claim sharpens. Jesus is not only the light who guides, he is the light who gives sight. And he's about to prove it by opening the eyes of a blind man who had never seen light in his life. To the original people, this meant Jesus fulfills Israel's hope. The promised light has arrived. Jesus brings revelation. Where he shines, truth becomes visible. Jesus' time is limited. While I'm in the world signals urgency. His public ministry won't last forever. Healing a blind man isn't a random act of compassion. It's a messianic demonstration of who he is. They would have understood only the true light of the world can open blind eyes, physically and spiritually. We live in a world full of confusion, darkness, and spiritual blindness. People stumble through suffering, identity, purpose, and truth. And into that darkness, Jesus still speaks, "I am the light of the world." Jesus is the only one who helps us see clearly. Jesus brings clarity when we feel lost. Jesus exposes what we'd rather hide inside. And Jesus, my friends, gives real sight. He doesn't just improve our vision, he gives us a new kind of sight, truth that helps us see God, ourselves, and the world rightly. And like that blind man, we don't have to understand everything before we obey. We simply trust the one who sees, who knows, and shines his light into darkness. Years ago, my wife and son were driving across the 35W bridge in Minnesota. It was an ordinary day. No warning signs, no uneasy feelings, no sense that anything was wrong. Just a mom and a child heading across the bridge they have crossed countless times before. A few hours later, that same bridge collapsed into the Mississippi River. When the news broke, I remember the moment like it's frozen in my memory. I felt my stomach drop. I felt the blood drain from my face. And then the realization hit me with a force I can't fully describe. They were on that bridge. Not days earlier, not weeks earlier, hours earlier. I remember holding them later that night, holding them tighter than usual, and feeling this overwhelming mixture of gratitude and fragility. Gratitude that they were safe, fragility because they knew how easily the story could have been different. In moments like that, your mind goes places you didn't expect. You start asking questions you can't answer. Why were they spared? Why were others on the bridge the moment it collapsed? Why does suffering strike some and not others? But here's what God whispered to my heart in the middle of all that emotion. You don't have to understand the why to trust the who. I don't believe God caused the bridge to collapse, but I do believe he was present with every person on that bridge and with my family hours before. I believe he was guiding, protecting, and working in ways we didn't even see. And that's exactly what Jesus is teaching in John 9. The disciples wanted to assign blame. Who sinned? Who caused this? But Jesus said, you're looking in the wrong direction. This isn't about blame. This is about God's work. Sometimes God's work looks like protection we didn't know we needed. Sometimes it looks like mercy we only recognize in hindsight. Sometimes it looks like God is quietly steering us away from danger before we ever knew it was there. That day when my wife and son crossed the bridge, I didn't see anything miraculous. But looking back, I see God's hands all over it. And it reminds me that even when life feels fragile, even when we don't understand what's happening, Jesus sees us and he is already at work. With that, let's read John 9, 6-17. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some said, it is he. Others said, no, but he is like him. He kept saying, I am the man. So they said to him, then how were your eyes opened? He answered, the man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said to him, he put mud on my eyes, and I washed and I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such things? And there was division among them. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him, since he has opened your eyes? He said, he is a prophet. For the first century Christians, this method of healing would have been shocking and symbolic. Jesus doesn't simply speak and touch the man's eyes. He spits on the ground, makes mud, and smears it on his face. Quite interesting. To us, interesting, strange. To them, it was loaded with meaning. First, this is really cool. Saliva was meant to have a healing power in the ancient world. So Jesus steps right into the world, but with divine authority. Second, kneading mud with your saliva, it was like work, and this was done on the Sabbath. So Jesus heals this man, and he confronts a system that prized regulations over restoration, showing God's compassion is not bound by tradition. Third, John's verb to anoint would have stood out. Jesus isn't just applying mud, he is marking this man for a divine encounter. Then Jesus sends him to the pool of Siloam, tied to cleansing, washing, and the Feast of Tabernacles. John notes it means sent, pointing to Jesus, the one sent from the Father. The power isn't the water, but it is in Jesus. And the man obeys, no questions, no delays. He goes, he washes, he sees. For the original hearers, it was a picture of faith, obedience before understanding, trust before sight. You know what? We often want to work in ways, we want God to work in ways that feel clean, predictable, and comfortable. But Jesus brings sight through a messy, earthly, unexpected process, but one that requires trust. That is often how God works in us. Sometimes the steps make absolutely no sense. Sometimes obedience feels like walking blind toward a place we'd never seen. But transformation, my friends, begins with trust. We obey first, and understanding comes later. And when Jesus opens our eyes, everything shifts. Old labels lose their grip. Old limitations lose their power. Jesus creates sight where there was none, light where there was only darkness. And like this man, our obedience becomes a doorway to a testimony people can't dismiss. Early Christians would have felt the tension immediately. A man born blind from birth is now walking around and he can see. And the people don't know what to do with him. His neighbors passed him for years. They knew his voice, his posture. They knew his begging spot. They thought they knew his story. But this change is so dramatic. They can't even agree on who he is. Some say it's him. No, others say it looks like him. The verb suggested ongoing chaotic debate, questioning, doubting, arguing. In the middle of their confusion, the man speaks calmly, "I am the man." Yes, he does use the word "I am," but not as a divine claim, but as a bold statement that his identity has been rewritten by what Jesus did to him. And when they ask how it happened, it's an honest answer. Jesus made mud, told me to wash, and now I see. Just the truth. For the original hearers, this was a model of Christian witness. Say what we know, tell what Jesus did, and let the transformation speak. When Jesus changes their life, not everyone knows what to do with it. Some celebrate, some question, some doubt. Some try to force you back into those old categories because your transformation confronts their assumptions. But this man shows something essential. Your change doesn't depend on everyone else's understanding. When Jesus opens your eyes, you are a new creation. Your story changes. Your direction becomes clear, even if others are confused. And your testimony, it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to have all the perfect words. You just need to say what you know. Jesus touched me, and now I see. That kind of truth, it unsettles people. It's the best way. It is in the best way. It creates holy confusion. It opens the doors for deeper conversations and points to the one who gives sight to the blind. For early Christians, this scene would have been tense. The neighbors bring this healing man to the Pharisees, the very man that felt most threatened by Jesus. And immediately the focus shifts from the miracle to the Sabbath. The Pharisees, they don't ask what happened. How did he do this? They just say he healed on the Sabbath. He needed mud. He applied it. In their system, that was work. Now the man stands before the leaders who care more about rules than restoration. Once again, this man says, he put mud on my eyes, I washed, now I see. No extra details, just the truth. And that testimony divides them. Some insist he can't be from God. He broke the Sabbath. Others push back. How can a sinner do this? trapped between rigid tradition and undeniable evidence. But they turn on the man. What do you say about him? He gives a courageous answer. He is a prophet. For the original readers, this was powerful. An untrained, once marginalized man speaking with growing spiritual sight. The pressure rises, and so does his boldness. Not everyone celebrates when Jesus changes a life. Some resist what they can't control. Some cling to systems and categories. Some would rather debate how than face the who. And sometimes the loudest skepticism comes from religious people. But this passage makes it plain. Opposition can never silence a genuine encounter with Jesus. When Jesus has opened your eyes, you don't need a title to speak. You don't need permission to testify. You don't need everyone else to agree. You don't need to win an argument. You just need to tell the truth. I was blind and now I see. That testimony cannot be shut down. And like this man, your courage grows as you keep speaking. Your clarity grows as you keep obeying. And your faith grows as you keep walking in the light. There is this man in Celebrate Recovery who had been coming for months. He'd tell you, man, I am not fixed, not finished, not a polished story tied up with a bow. This man is still working the steps. He's still fighting old patterns, still learning to trust Jesus one day at a time. But the change is real. He's not who he used to be. And people around him don't know what to do with that. Some say he's changing, others doubt. It won't last, they say. A few assume he's pretending. And some quietly wonder, could Jesus do that for me? When they ask what's happening, he doesn't give a long speech. He doesn't claim perfection. He just says, I am not the same. Jesus is opening my eyes. That's John 9. The man born blind didn't understand everything. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't even know who Jesus was fully yet. But he obeyed, he watched, and he saw. And his testimony grew stronger every time he told it. As we come to the end of this message, whether you're sitting in this room or joining us online from your living room, your car, your kitchen table, I want you to hear this clearly. John 9 is not a story of a man born blind. It's a story of every person Jesus touches. Some of you listening today know exactly what it feels like to sit in darkness, to carry pain you didn't choose, to walk through seasons you don't understand, to ask questions that don't have easy answers. And Jesus meets you right there, not with blame, but with purpose. Some of you are in the middle of obedience, taking steps that don't make sense yet, trusting Jesus even when you can't see the whole picture. And Jesus honors that obedience. He uses it. He works through it. Some of you are experiencing transformation, slow, steady, ongoing. Maybe you're rebuilding your life. Maybe you're learning to walk in freedom. And the people around you don't always know what to do with the new you, but Jesus does. He sees you. He knows you. He is still working in you. And here's the challenge for every single one of us. If Jesus says, open your eyes, don't go back to living like you're still blind. Don't go back to the old patterns. Don't go back to the old labels. Don't go back to the old man you were. Don't go back to darkness. Walk in the light you've been given. Obey the voice that has called you. Tell the story Only you can tell. You may not have all the answers. You may still be in the process. You may still be learning to see. But your testimony is powerful because it's real. I was blind and now I see. That's the story that changes families. That's the story that brings hope to the hurting. That's the story that shines light into the darkness. That's the story that points people to Jesus. So whether you're here in the sanctuary or watching miles away, Jesus is asking you the same question he asked the man at the end of this chapter. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Not just with words, not just with your mind, but with your obedience, with your courage, with your life. Because when Jesus opens your eyes, everything changes. Okay, so that was the end of the message. Some words got a little blurred there. We're working out speaking very plainly, slowing down. But anyway, thank you for listening if you were listening, and God bless your day.